Today we're going to be talking about the Uber hack. It happened about 3 years ago now, and it's a very interesting case that I think everybody kind of should be aware about. Everybody should have kind of seen what happened there. But first things first, really quickly, who am I? I am Robbe Van Roey, also known as PinkDraconian online. I work full-time as an offensive security lead and penetration tester at Torion. I am a very technical person. Like, what excites me is the bits and the bytes. That's why I wake up. That's my goal in life, is to kind of look at as many bits and bytes as possible and to figure out security issues in them. Besides that, I also really like talking. In school, they told me that I talked a bit too much. Right now, that's become a skill that's valuable to me. So I'm very glad about that. Well, I talk about secure code on Wizer, which is super awesome. Outside of that, I also search for bugs in large companies as a bug bounty hunter. So I find a vulnerability, and then the company pays me for that vulnerability. And I also create secure content, so security content on YouTube, mainly focused towards hackers there. So that's kind of what I do. But I am a very, very technical person. I love the bits and the bytes, and I love finding security vulnerabilities. And one way that I express that is through finding CVEs. And CVEs are kind of, a CVE is a vulnerability that has been found in a product that many people use. One example of this is the lights that I'm currently using to illuminate my face. That's a product that some people have in their homes, and I found a vulnerability in them where I could remotely kind of make the lights change color and do crazy things. I also found some issues in NVIDIA products and in some large libraries, mainly focusing on AI libraries right now. So yeah, this year I found 33 CVEs. So I'm very technical. Pretty much all I do day in, day out is looking for bugs and looking at bits and bytes. And that's why the Uber hack is maybe not directly up my alley, because the Uber hack is a bit different. The Uber hack, it all started with phishing. Phishing is a topic that doesn't directly interest me a lot. I like systems. Systems are predictable. You know, a system you can understand, you can write code, and the code kind of says what it does. Humans are totally different. Like, you cannot kind of comprehend humans. Humans are the weakest link for a reason. It's because nobody understands what's going on in our minds. So this hack kind of starts with phishing, which is like the opposite of the technical work that usually excites me. But another reason why this hack is really, really interesting is because of who performed this hack. And this hack was performed by some guy named Teapot. And Teapot, well, right now we know that he is probably connected with the Lapsus hacking group, but not really a lot is known about him. But the fun thing is that he was very proud that he hacked Uber, so he went to social media and started bragging about it. He started posting screenshots. He shared his Telegram so people could actually chat with him. So this is like a real chat right after the Uber hack happened, of the guy just bragging and saying, so basically Uber had this network share, and the share contained some PowerShell scripts, and through that I was able to get inside. This guy was super proud of what he did. And this is also nice because usually when a hack happens, a lot is kind of in the dark. We don't know the fine details. The company comes out with a statement, and the statement says some generic things about what happened. But in this case, we actually get like the insider details of what happened, which is super cool. Okay, so this hack, it started with social engineering. It started with, well, first of all, getting access to some credentials of an employee. And here it's not quite sure what happened. Uber says that it's likely that the credentials of an employee were found on a dark web. Other resources say that the attacker kind of mimicked an Uber login page and sent it to employees, and somebody logged in there. And this scenario is very likely. There's even some really cool tools, like this evil GINX tool that is a man-in-the-middle framework. So it's like an open source framework. Anybody can go download it right now, that you can set up in like 5 minutes and immediately have these phishing pages up and running to use. And in this case, you can see on the screenshot, the Google credentials of somebody were stolen here. were captured. So tools like these are just publicly available and anybody can download it and use it. And I think that also kind of ties in with the fact that this guy, Teapot, who hacked Uber, he didn't seem to be extremely skilled. He was definitely a skilled person, but he was found to be 18 years old. So he probably used tools like this to run the attack. So at some point, he got access to credentials of an Uber employee, or in fact, an Uber contractor. So somebody who was working with Uber, but not directly employed. And Teapot tried to log into the Uber VPN using these credentials, which worked. However, well, he got this notification. Two-factor authentication was enabled, which is kind of like hackers. You don't want to see that as a hacker, because two-factor authentication is great for personal security of people, but as a hacker, it's really difficult to bypass technically. The technical specifications of two-factor authentication are fairly strong, and there aren't that many bypasses. However, two-factor authentication is a very human component. The human has to perform an interaction. And in this case, when you logged into the VPN, and the two-factor authentication sent a notification to your phone. So you get a login request and you have to approve or deny it. Well, of course, this Uber employee denied this notification. They have been thought that, well, you need to deny these notifications if it's not you logging in. Everybody knows that, and there's no problem there. However, what happens if you get a ton of these notifications? Like, your phone is blowing up with notifications, and this was actually a vulnerability in the two-factor authentication provider. It's not really a vulnerability, but the fact that it would just keep on popping up with notifications, it kind of puts a lot of, imagine that your phone is just blowing up notifications, and at some point you might just approve one because you're sick and tired of it. Well, add on to that our hacker called up the victim and said, hey, I am from the Uber help desk here, and we are noticing a lot of 2FA requests coming into your phone. One of our systems is failing and it just keeps on sending them until one is accepted. So just accept one of the 2FA requests and everything will be fine. I know that sounds a bit suspicious, but this call was made at 3 a.m. So, this guy, he just woke up at 3 a.m. with 1,000 notifications on his phone, getting called by the Uber help desk. He got sick and tired of it and just did what was asked of him and approved one of the 2FA messages. And that is how this hacker entered Uber's internal network. And this is kind of where, for me, the most interesting part of this hack happens. And it's because at this point, the technical part of the hack starts. And this is where hacking humans and hacking systems kind of meets. And that's something very important. And people don't realize that when they're doing the security in companies, they're either only focusing on hacking humans or only focusing on hacking systems. But in most real hacks, these were intertwined, and at some point a human was tricked into doing something, and then they continued with hacking the systems. So that also ties into one of my biggest pet peeves in pen testing. Whenever I go to a client, they ask me to do a web application pen test. They ask me to test their external network, which is all great, and maybe they don't have any vulnerabilities there. And then I offer them, hey, why don't we perform an internal penetration test? And then I get told, well, we don't need an internal penetration test because we train our employees not to click on links, which is great. I mean, you should train your employees not to click on links, but there are so many ways that somebody could get into your internal network. Employees could get phished. Big hacking groups have malware that bypasses your XDRs. I've even heard of a scenario where somebody just paid a cleaning lady $500 and told her, hey, just plug this in somewhere into the wall. And the cleaning lady was like, okay, $500, sure, I'll just plug this device into the wall and then get some easy money. Stuff like that happens. So people get into your internal network that needs to be tested at some point. And in this case, there's also a good question to ask, and it's, you can say we train our employees not to click on links, but what about the employee that just joined on day one? Has he had that same training? What about the contractor that is not really an employee, that's a contractor? Has he been trained? What about that big group of interns that we have every year? Do they receive the exact same training? All of these are kind of weak spots. So you should kind of assume that something is going to happen, that somebody is going to get past the human defenses and prepare for the worst case scenario there. Should obviously still very much focus on the human component as well, because you want to limit the amount of times that is going to happen over the lifetime of a company. So for the technical part then, well, the attacker got access to Uber's internal network. And when you're in an internal network, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of servers, a lot of PCs, and a lot of interesting stuff that you can do as an attacker. And in this case, the hacker ran a tool called Snaffler. And this is, again, an off-the-shelf tool that you can download right now and use right now. And what it is going to do is it's going to listen in everywhere on the network. It's going to find all of the SMB shares that it can find, all of the Azure or Microsoft Office files it can find anywhere. It's going to look through all the files on a local system and every other system it can access. And it's simply going to look for secrets, passwords, API keys, all the secret data that may be present in those files. And if we look at the tool here, we can see that in this case, it found an SSH key, it found a CMD credential, somebody logged in using superpassword 123987. So this tool is just going to take a huge network, a huge corporate network with thousands of PCs. It's going to get all of the files it can get access to and going to search for passwords. And in this case, that worked for the attacker. The attacker found a PowerShell script, just like this one, that contained a password. And a PowerShell script, if you're not aware, it's a kind of script that is used by system administrators to perform administrative tasks on Windows systems. It's very common that you find hard-coded credentials into these PowerShell scripts because the system administrators, they want to automate all of their tasks. And well, if you automate doing something connecting to some system, it needs a password. So it's very easy to just hard-code it into the PowerShell script. Now, this happens quite a lot. In pen tests as well, I find these kind of issues very, very often. But usually these passwords, they aren't that important. They give me some access further in the systems, but they're usually not as bad as in this case. Because in this case, this password, it gave access to the Thycotic PAM, and a PAM is a privileged access management system, which is pretty much a password manager, but then for the entire company, every system in the company, all of the credentials are stored there. So this attacker found admin credentials for pretty much the worst case scenario possible environment to be breached, because it contains every password, every secret, every API key within the Uber network. This is kind of the worst case single point of failure. If this gets breached, your entire company gets breached. And that is also what we directly saw because, and this is the really cool part, right now I can show you screenshots of AWS in the Uber network because this hacker was so proud of what he did. He was just happy to show these screenshots and post them on Twitter and post them and send them to people on Telegram. He was clearly very proud. So this is the Uber AWS. If you don't know, AWS is the Amazon Web Services, and it kind of runs all the cloud components within Uber. So this is all the databases that Uber has, all of the servers that Uber has. All of them were accessible by this hacker, and then they could just stop it, read the data, extract the data. Like, this is huge. But if that wasn't enough, it was also possible for him to access the VMware Sphere environment, which is a virtualization environment where kind of your cloud but also your on-site, on-prem servers you can connect to and whatnot. So yeah, through this, he could also connect to kind of any server that Uber had going on, which is very bad as well. On top of that, he gained access to the Uber's SentinelOne, which is an XDR. It's for detection and response of threats. So even if Uber were able to detect this guy in the network and detect that something really bad was going on, well, he was the administrator of their system that detects that. So he could change the rules on what is detected. He could stop notifications from reaching the right people. And through the system, you can even build in backdoors to say, well, if this IP address does some bad stuff, just leave it. Don't worry about it. So yeah, he had full control over the Uber network, even to the point where he could access their Slack environment. And in their Slack environment, as you can see, they could read they could see all of the workspaces. They could likely also see DMs sent between different people. They were pretty much an administrator on the Slack environment. And then they compromised a lot more environments, but one funny one to mention is that he compromised the HackerOne environment of Uber. HackerOne is a bug bounty platform where hackers can send in bugs and then Uber can handle them. And he started publicly making posts saying, "Hey, Uber has been hacked. I did everything. I hacked it. I got domain admin. I got AWS admin, and I also hacked this HackerOne account." He was just like joking around and making comments and just making sure that the whole world kind of knew about this breach, which is on the one hand a bit funny and weird, but on the other hand also really, really lucky for Uber, because in this case we all know about it because it went so public, but this guy could have also just stayed dormant inside of the network. He could have not started compromising all of these systems. He could have done it silently and just hid himself in these systems without anybody knowing, and he could have started stealing customer data. He could have started changing the database, changing the way the Uber applications work. This could have been the worst thing to ever happen to Uber. They were very lucky that all this guy seemed to want is to get some exposure, to be kind of well known and whatnot. The fact that the HackerOne system got hacked also makes some people think that this Teapot guy was a hacker that reported a vulnerability to Uber expecting a large payment, and maybe they didn't get that large payment that they expected, and that's kind of what made them mad. So it's not fully clear exactly why he performed the hack, but what is very clear is that all he really wanted is the exposure from this. And that is kind of what this Uber hack was all about. Now, I also quickly wanted to touch on some lessons learned, because what can we learn from this case? I have a couple of questions that we can discuss. The first question is, who is to blame for this hack? Is it, on the one hand, the contractor who got phished? Can you blame him for what happened? Or is it the developer who left the credentials in the PowerShell file? Should he be blamed for this? Should the security team of Uber be blamed for having like a single point of failure where all of their credentials were stored? Is it management who is to blame? It's a really funny question to ask, because people will have very, very different opinions on this. Another thing that you can ask yourself is, how could this have been prevented? Like, knowing what you know now, what actions would you have taken? I think, first of all, of course, the fact that you had all of these notifications coming into this employee's phone or this contractor's phone, well, that could have been prevented if the two-factor authentication system just kind of stopped sending notifications after maybe 5 of them. But then again, I mean, somebody could have gotten into the network in another way. So another prevention would have been to just not have those credentials in the PowerShell scripts. And in fact, this is not even the first time that Uber has been hacked because they left hard-coded credentials somewhere. I think in 2016, they also got hacked because some Git repository was leaked that contained AWS credentials. So that probably should have been prevented as well. On the other hand, why were all of these credentials stored in one single system, and why was there even a password, an admin password for that entire system? That's also very bad. So that's also an interesting topic. And then another, and I think this is the most interesting question, is how does Uber know that they've stopped this compromise? This attacker, they got access to pretty much anything in the Uber environment. They could have easily spun up some AWS stuff, built in some backdoors everywhere. Uber says that they rotated all the passwords, so they changed all the passwords. But can you be sure that this attacker hasn't just created some new account somewhere? They even gained access to the G Suite administrator portal, so they could literally create new accounts within the Uber network. They could have put a backdoor pretty much everywhere in the company. So it's really hard to kind of know when the compromise has fully been stopped. And this again is why Uber was very, very lucky that this attacker only really wanted the exposure, because if this was a full-on hacking group that wanted money out of them, they would have built in 1,000 backdoors and it would have pretty much been impossible to ever get them out of this network. So what is the overarching lesson learned that I want to talk about? It's that technical security and human security are both incredibly important. It's really a match that you need to have. You cannot neglect either one, because it's going to cost you a lot, like in this case happened to Uber. And I want to thank you for listening to me. I hope that you learned something new, and I hope that I brought up some good discussion points for you. Thank you.